I worked seasonal maintenance out of Olympic National Park for 3 years, mostly trail clearing and structure checks in the backcountry zones. When the rotation got slow, I volunteered for cabin inspections, small heritage buildings left from the old homesteads deep in the Hoh rainforest. The jobs were simple on paper. Check the shutters and hinges. Look for fallen limbs, water damage, or animal intrusion. Make sure no one had broken in for shelter. You fill out a quick form, take a few pictures, and move on. Late in autumn, when the park gets empty and the air turns heavy with mist, the Hoh goes quiet, except for elk bugles and the river. That's when I picked up a call about a faint light reported in the upper window of the McAllister homestead, an older cabin a few miles upriver from the mini-trail pullout near the start of the Hoh River Trail. The report came from 2 hikers who swore they saw a lantern flicker in the loft around dusk. My supervisor, Ranger Sloan, told me to swing by, verify it was secure, and leave a standard notice if someone had been staying there. If it looked like an active squat, law enforcement would handle it in the morning. I checked out a truck from the maintenance shed near the visitor center, signed onto Channel 3, and started the drive. The rain had eased to a fine mist, that kind that just hangs in the air and soaks through your clothes without you noticing. By the time I reached the locked gate at the trailhead, twilight had started bleeding into the trees. I hiked in with a flashlight, boots sinking into the moss-soft path. The forest swallowed sound, even my breathing felt too loud. When I reached the clearing, the cabin looked like every other one I'd checked. Sagging roof, cedar walls going silver with age, and a chimney streaked with moss. But the front latch looked new, metal too clean against the weathered frame. I swept the beam across the porch. Fresh boot marks in the mud, one set leading up to the door and none leaving. The padlock was still in place, but the hasp had been twisted slightly, like someone had forced it open once and then tried to bend it back. Inside, the air smelled of cold wood and smoke that wasn't recent. Dust covered everything except 2 clear trails, one from the door to a table, one to the ladder leading to the loft. On the table sat a sardine can crushed flat and a square of flannel cloth cut neatly from a shirt. No trash, no packs, nothing that said camper. In the hearth were 2 short logs laid side by side, never burned. Above them, a handprint marked the soot on the stone, small, faint, but too clean to be old. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed to the loft. The dust was thicker up there, but a long oval patch showed where someone had been sleeping. Against the far wall sat a rolled sleeping bag and a glass jar half full of murky water. When I opened it, the smell had a metallic edge, not rot, not algae, like blood diluted in rainwater. Next to it lay a hand-carved brush made from cedar and bound with fishing line, not store-bought, homemade. Procedure said to post a 24-hour notice and leave. So I wrote the warning, slid it under the jar to keep it from curling, and called in clear. Nothing moved. I locked the door behind me, hiked out, and camped that night at Minnie Peterson Campground instead of driving back to Port Angeles. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke to the faint jingle of my tent zipper bell, just once, soft. I froze, listening. What I heard next wasn't an animal. It was breathing. Slow, measured, and close enough that I could feel it sinking with my own breath. I cleared my throat deliberately, then snapped on my headlamp and unzipped the fly in one motion. Nothing. Just fog, glistening grass, and the dark shapes of trees. I scanned the ground. There was a long depression through the wet grass, ending at the gravel road. I could make out a narrow footprint with a flat heel, not a boot tread, and too small for most men. I didn't call it in. Not then. With no one in sight, it would have just gone in the logbook as possible contact. At first light, I went back to the McAllister cabin to post the official notice. The paper I'd left under the jar was gone. On the outside of the door, A new paper had been nailed beneath an old fencing staple, my same notice, with my first name written underneath in large, uneven letters. My name isn't on my uniform or truck. I backed off the porch and called for a law enforcement ranger. Sloan sent Ranger Calloway out from Fork's steady guy, calm under pressure. When he arrived, we went through the cabin together, gloves on. The jar was now on the table downstairs, not in the loft. The ladder had been moved slightly away from the hatch. It would force anyone climbing up to stretch just a little more, make more noise. Calloway noticed right away. We called out, cleared the lower floor, and went up. The sleeping bag was gone. The space smelled different, not just dust anymore, but sweat. Calloway traced his flashlight along the wall and paused at the far corner. A draft moved through the seam near the roof. The wood there sounded hollow. He pried gently with a multi-tool. The plank swung inward on a hinge made of twine and wire. Behind it was a crawl space narrow, running along the chimney line. The air inside was colder. On a makeshift shelf sat a row of tiny bones sorted by size. Mice, birds, maybe squirrels. A piece of twine threaded through tufts of hair. And a tin of salt, packets the kind from gas station diners. In the back corner, a vent hole opened to the outside, camouflaged from view with bark glued into place. We didn't climb in. Calloway bagged the hair cord, and what looked like human hair snagged on a splinter. We found marks on the beam elbows, over and over, polished smooth. Someone had lain there for hours, listening. Behind the chimney, outside, the vent hole was barely visible, just a darker patch of rot under the eaves. 10 yards away, under a sword fern, the leaves were matted down, and a thin stick was balanced across 2 roots, the kind of thing that would snap if you hurried through. A warning line. We sealed the place, filed for a hard closure. The park superintendent didn't want public notice too many curious hikers. Our maintenance crew fitted mesh over the vents, braced the windows from the inside, and sealed the chimney gap with mortar. From the outside, it looked like history preserved. From the inside, it was dead air. The lab later confirmed the hair mix, deer, raccoon, and several human strands. No matches in databases. One sample, likely female. Over the next month, we found old visitor logs mentioning movement or faint lights in other cabins. Anderson Homestead, Kestner Place, even near Bogachil, always during the off-season. That was enough for the superintendent to order new policy. No solo interior checks. I transferred to North Cascades National Park after that. Trail work, bridges, posthole jobs, open air, open sightlines. I made one note in my personnel file. No interior structure assignments alone. It wasn't fear, exactly. Just recognition. Whoever had been in that cabin was patient and observant. They had time, they had discipline, and they understood how we moved. The return note with my name on it told me they'd watched me close enough to learn it. On my last day before transferring, I helped Calloway mount the final steel plate across the loft hatch. When it tightened, the draft stopped. The air went still, not just quiet, but sealed. We locked the door, hung the closure sign, and left. From the road, it looked like every other gray old cabin in the moss. Sometimes when I hike a back trail and see one sitting in the fog, I feel that same stillness, the kind that tells you something once breathed there, learned the space better than you ever could. That's enough to keep moving. I quit hunting after one last late-season trip in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, Montana. I grew up on elk and venison, the kind of hunting that kept the freezer full and the habits simple. Hang the quarters high, keep camp clean, burn the scraps, latch the door. It was a late November trip. 3 of us, me, Dylan, who owned most of the gear and planned the routes, and Mark, an EMT who liked to keep our first aid kit overstocked and our risks minimal. We used an old Forest Service cabin Dylan's cousin had the key to, tucked up a spur off Rock Creek Road, a few miles from the Anaconda-Pintler Wilderness boundary. It wasn't much: a sagging roof, potbelly stove, 2 bunks, plywood table, the kind of place you use because it's already there. We were chasing late movement near a cut line above a stand of lodgepole. The road in was half ice, half ruts, and by the time we parked, the light had gone copper behind the ridges. Before we turned in, we set a game pole between 2 pines, about 30 feet from the cabin, and mounted a pair of motion floods that Dylan had wired to a small inverter battery. No cameras, just light. We hung a coil of rope and double-checked the knots. That first evening, I tagged a small cow elk down by a draw that funneled into Rock Creek. The shot was clean, just before dark. We dressed her fast, packed her back in 2 trips, and got her hanging. The air smelled like snow coming. We boiled coffee, ate out of cans, and kept the fire steady. The woods went still in a way that made sound feel like trespass. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound that wasn't the stove. One single heavy thud, like a dropped haunch hitting sand. Then silence. The air inside the cabin smelled faintly metallic. I didn't open the door. I just lay there, awake, boots still on, until dawn. Outside, the gut bucket we'd left under the pole was overturned and empty. The elk was still hanging, but the blood in the dirt below it had been dragged into long, parallel streaks, like fingers had combed through it. We circled the area. The tracks were wrong. They looked bare, but not human. The toes were too long, and the weight sat on the ball, not the heel. On a patch of bark below the pole, a few pale hairs were caught in the rough. Not elk, not coyote. Mark, ever the medic, bagged them in a Ziploc, and then looked at his own hands like he'd just done something foolish. We talked about leaving. Dylan said the gut bucket was bait, and we'd just drawn in scavengers, coyotes, maybe a mountain lion. He wanted to stay, said daylight was worth the meat. I didn't like the smell, didn't like the bloodlines, but I stayed. We skinned the elk halfway down to cool the meat, tied off the scraps in a trash bag, and set it inside the cabin to burn later. After sunset, the floods kept false triggering, flashing against the pines. We turned them down to medium sensitivity and tried to sleep. Around 11, the windows went white. The lights tripped, went dark, then flared again, and in that bright second, we heard it. A slow, wet tearing sound, the kind of sound muscle makes when it gives. Then the iron smell, thick enough to taste. Dylan leaned to a knothole in the door, looked out, and whispered that someone was crouched under the elk, pulling at it. He said if it was a poacher, he'd call them out and let them make it right. He lifted his rifle, cracked the latch, and shouted, "Back off the game." The flood hit again, and I saw the shape, too narrow frame, arms long, elbows high, head angled wrong, knees out like an animal crouch. Then darkness. Dylan fired once through the crack. The shot split the quiet open and folded it back in. Something exhaled outside, not a cry, not pain, just a long, heavy breath leaving a large chest. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then from the tree line, Dylan's voice called out, calm, conversational. "We're good. Just a graze. Come give me a light." But Dylan was standing next to me, rifle still warm in his hands. He said, low and steady, "I didn't say that." The voice came again, closer this time. "Mark, grab the med kit. Nate, come out." Same tone, same pitch, but off by a fraction. Every syllable leaned wrong. Something moved against the door. The handle twisted just enough to tick. Then fingers traced along the seam. Slow, deliberate, like someone learning the shape of the latch. The next time the flood snapped on, the game pole was empty. The rope swung bare, tapping the post. We shoved the table against the door, wedged the bunks tight behind it. The fire burned low. Every so often, grit fell from the rafters, like something was crawling across the roof. Outside, something dragged slow and heavy, like a wet hide pulled over pine needles. We waited for dawn, but Dylan wouldn't. He said it was wounded, maybe dying, and he wouldn't leave it to suffer. He said give it half an hour to bed down, then we'd end it. An hour passed. Then, softly, from outside the voice again, barely above a whisper. Doors clear, bring the light, check the draw. Our words, but rearranged, flat, memorized wrong. A tap touched the window glass. Just one. Dylan cracked the latch again, against my grip, and stepped onto the stoop with the rifle raised. The floods hit white, empty clearing, no elk. Then dark again. Something lunged low from the side. The wall shook. A dry, guttural sound pressed through the planks like a snarl made without lungs. We slammed the door. It stuck halfway. Dylan yanked, shouting, and when it came free, the rifle twisted between the jambs. When it fell inside, it wasn't straight anymore. The barrel had a full bend near the receiver. We stood staring at it, breath held, and Dylan wasn't beside us. No scream, no footfalls, just the wind coming up from the draw. We stayed locked inside until gray light. When we stepped out, we found boot tracks his leading backward from the stoop toward the tree line. Between them, the long, flat impressions again. They ended at the edge of the draw, where the ground turned to rock. No blood, no drag marks. We hiked out. A rancher with a logging truck found us on the road and radioed the county sheriff. By noon, there were deputies, a warden, and a dog team at the cabin. The dog refused to track beyond the game pole. It just kept whining at the stoop. The warden said it looked like a bear, maybe a grizzly, come down late from the high country. Said the rifle could have twisted in the doorframe when we pulled it. End quote. The warden said it. I didn't argue, but the bend was too clean, too high up the barrel. Mark tried to hand over the hair sample. The deputy said it wasn't evidence of anything, no chain of custody, no report to attach it to. They listed it as a probable wildlife incident, missing person presumed dead. By spring, the cabin was condemned and pulled down. The spur closed with a berm and a sign about erosion control. Mark finished his EMT license, stopped saying yes to hunts. I sold my rifle, moved to Missoula, 3rd floor of a brick apartment. I sleep with the window open just enough to hear cars, because silence feels wrong now. When people ask why I quit, I tell them the truth. I can say out loud, it wasn't the killing, it was what came to it. On my last drive down Rock Creek Road, I stopped at the overlook near the switchback. The timber rolled away like a frozen sea. Elk country, good country. I stood there a long time, remembering that sound in the night, how something alive can imitate the shape of your voice, but never the warmth inside it. We thought the walls kept us safe, but that's not what walls do. They just give what's outside something to listen to.
It had been 6 months since we lost Liam. 6 months of a silence between my sister Avery and me that felt heavier than any grief I could name. He had been the bridge between my pragmatism and her untamed artistry, always laughing, always pulling us together. Without him, Avery and I were strangers with shared memories. That's why I booked the cabin. I thought the Sawtooth National Forest, with its jagged peaks and honest wilderness, could be neutral territory, a place to find each other again. I thought the quiet would heal us. I was wrong. The last few miles to the cabin were a lesson in isolation. My sedan rattled along a steep dirt spur. The road baked a rusty brown, winding through towering pines and Douglas firs that swallowed the waning sun. The forest seemed to fold over itself, cutting us off from the world. Are we there yet? Avery's voice floated from the passenger seat, flat and drained. She hadn't looked up from her sketchbook since we left the highway. Almost, I said. The cabin, the owner had said, would be marked by a carved post at a small clearing. When we arrived, it was smaller than the photos suggested, built from thick, dark logs weathered to silver and gray. The mortar between them had crumbled like frozen ash. The cabin didn't sit on the earth. It had grown out of it. Inside, the smell of damp wood and lingering smoke filled the air. One large room served as living, dining, and sleeping space, with a massive stone fireplace anchoring the far wall. Avery finally looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Dark, searching, haunted. "It's perfect," she whispered. The first day was a fragile truce. We hiked a 5-mile loop along a ridge trail, the climb leaving no room for forced conversation. From the top, the jagged peaks of the Sawtooths stretched endlessly, blue and gray waves of stone. We ate our sandwiches in silence. A comfortable silence for the first time in months. That evening, the forest went quiet. Not the normal layered hush of nightfall, but a sudden, oppressive stillness. One moment, the wind rustled through the trees. The next, there was nothing. A void pressed against the cabin. "Do you hear that?" Avery's voice was too loud in the stillness. "Hear what?" I said, trying to sound calm. But she was right. This wasn't peaceful quiet. It was absence. The next night, the silence returned, heavier. As we sat on the porch, nursing lukewarm tea, a new sound began. A slow, rhythmic scrape. Rock against rock. Methodical. "What is that?" Avery whispered, eyes wide. "A boulder rolling?" I suggested, heart beginning to race. But the sound was wrong. Too consistent. Too deliberate. It moved parallel to our clearing for nearly an hour before fading. We locked the cabin door, wedged a chair under the knob. My rational mind tried. That evening, the scraping returned, closer, unmistakable, coming from the densest shadows where the trail vanished. "I'm going to see what it is," I said, voice trembling. "No, Avery," she grabbed my arm. But I had to know. I grabbed the heavy flashlight and stepped toward the tree line, Avery behind me. The light cut through the shadows, but nothing visible emerged until I shined it on the ground. 2 deep, parallel gouges, about a foot apart, carved into the frozen dirt and shale beneath the forest floor. Fresh, displaced soil, still moist. Avery gasped. Nothing could explain it. Nothing rational. and in the pressing silence of the Sawtooth night, I knew it was out there. We scrambled back inside, slamming the door. The scraping started again, now on the porch, methodical, immense. Each scrape vibrated through the floorboards, a weight that felt alive. My mind screamed with fear. Then another sound, grinding, stone on stone, right next to the window. I crept toward it, body trembling. Outside, a hulking figure blocked the moonlight. Its body was a mass of ice and shale, fused together like frozen, twisted boulders and jagged mineral veins. No face, no features, just a shape, humanoid in silhouette, arms ending in massive rock-like points, the very instruments of the gouges we'd seen. It tested the cabin door with deliberate pressure. Oak groaned. Splinters rained down. Dust fell from the ceiling. Avery sobbed in the far corner. "We're going to die here." "No," I said. "We'll get out. Think." She pointed at my backpack, the old logging trail, a metal fire tower marked on the map. We moved while the creature focused on the door. The window had swollen shut from years of cold and moisture. Together, we forced it open. I lifted Avery through, then climbed, ankles screaming. Behind us, the cabin door groaned and splintered under the creature's relentless weight. We ran blindly into the forest, following the trail. The gouges in the earth reappeared. Two parallel depressions, faint, but guiding us. The forest pressed around us like a living thing, but the creature did not follow. At last, the silhouette of the fire tower rose against the bruised pre-dawn sky. We scrambled up the rusted metal stairs to the small cab at the top. We collapsed inside, huddling together. The sun rose over the jagged Sawtooth peaks, light spilling across stone and snow, reasserting the normal rhythm of the world. Birdsong returned. Wind stirred the trees. The unnatural silence broke. We stayed until the sun was high, then descended, leaving the cabin and all its memories behind. Months later, Avery sculpts metal again. I design buildings. We survived. But sometimes, in the quiet hum of my apartment, I can feel it. The ice-shale's shape, methodical, patient, faceless. The scraping that should not exist. And I remember the pressing stillness of the Sawtooth night. We are alive, lucky, but never unmarked by what we saw.